Hi, my name is Kevin Wachiro. I'm the founder and editor, producer of a storytelling podcast called Nipe Story. Nipe Story was started 3 years ago, and Nipe Story basically gives voice. It's audible versions of short story fiction from Kenya and across the African continent. Welcome to this masterclass. I'm just going to talk to you about podcasting. I'll share a little bit about my journey and then key important elements that you need to consider if you're looking at creating a podcast and what makes a podcast actually work. And then I'll also share challenges and learning points. Challenges and learning points that I've had along the way in this journey. I really hope that at the end of this that you will, know more about podcasting and take the plunge like I did. And welcome to the world of podcasting. We need more people, we need more content from the continent going out onto the digital space. Welcome to this session. So where did Nipe Story come from? A little bit about myself. I'm a trained radio producer. I've worked in radio for over 20 years, and I love radio. And I studied radio when I went to school. And there's a phrase, and I use this often. My supervisor at radio says, sound makes a lot more colorful pictures in our heads. And for me, that is true in learning to play with sound, in learning to manipulate with sound, in learning, to travel with sound. I see those pictures in my head as well when I listen to an audiobook, when I listen to a good news bulletin on radio. I'm unapologetically a radio buff, So for me, I love that. I love the fact that I'm able to be transported through sound to different places. And for me, it also applies when it comes to text. I love reading, I love fiction, and that comes from when I was a child. I used to read magazines a lot, and eventually novels as well. And it's just so fantastic when I see those pictures in my head. And basically, Nipe Story has given me the opportunity to combine my love for the written text and my love for sound. I think as I approach midlife crisis, you start asking yourself what you want to do with yourself. I was given the opportunity to train some young journalists in radio production and the importance of sound in good radio production and also in news. And then I was also given the opportunity to train them on podcasting. So I did a lot of research. I was beginning to enjoy podcasting. I was beginning to meet other people who are podcasting, and I was like, oh, they're so cool, I was really admiring them. And I'd started playing with the thought of having my own podcast, but procrastination, is I think my middle name. But I was put in this position where I had to train young journalists about podcasting, and this took a period of 1 week. And I learned a lot as I was teaching the team, as I was teaching this cohort. And at the end of the week, each of them had to come up with a podcast idea, and they had to put something together for the class to listen to. And what I'd also done was I'd invited friends who are already in that podcasting field to come and listen, to come and offer advice, to share their own experiences, pretty much like what I'm doing now, and answer questions from the class. So on the final day, I asked Jazz, good friend of mine from his sports podcast, which I will remember along the way. So he came in and he talked about Benchwarmers Kenya. Check that out. He came in and spoke about their journey as podcasters, and it was really interesting when I was listening to I would say the guest speakers, because I was also taking in a lot of myself. And it's interesting, I had 3 guest speakers, and each and every one of them challenged me to start my own podcast. They're like, Kevo, when are you going to start your podcast? And for me, it put me in an interesting position where I'm teaching young individuals about podcasting. And yet again, I'd had this idea that I'd put on the back burner. So I finished training them, and I finished training them, and I had time off, and I took that time to start crafting Nipe Story. What was this thing? And back then, I had 3 ideas for a podcast. I thought podcasting was easy. There was Nipe Story. There was another idea called Everyday People, and there was another one called Cancer Pod. So I thought, you know what, come up with 3 podcasts, a podcast every week. That was good to go. So I focused first on Nipe Story, and Nipe Story for me was like, I love fiction. You know, I love story fiction, and I love editing. I love recording. I love being able, like we used to call it, performing to the microphone. I love that, you know. And I figured this is the one that seems the easiest to produce. So I did my research, got the name, got someone to design the logo for Nipe Story. I started looking for sound producers to come up with the sound of it, because those are things I had picked up. You know, what is your name? Be specific about your content. You know, make sure you've got good sound. Make sure you've got good audio. You know, and consistency. So I started laying the foundation for this podcast. And for me, that's how Nipe Story began. And that was a journey that, looking back, was amazing. That started just over 3 years ago. How have I changed in the 3 years of producing Nipe Story? There's a whole new appreciation for me for audio. You know, there's a whole new appreciation. I know my editing skills have become sharper, they become tighter. My ear also, like I said earlier on, is very sensitive to sound, very sensitive. I'm constantly listening to sound, not just within my workspace, but even as I walk around, I'm picking up sound. So I'm a much better listener to sound, the sounds that surround me and around me. And I know I'm a much better writer, thanks to the fact that people have given me their words to produce. I have learned a lot, and for me, just editing and producing all the stories that you hear on Nipe Story, for me, are my own masterclass. I have learned so many different styles. There are times I listen to a story and I'm like, man, I hope to write like this one day. So for me, to all the writers who've offered their stuff to Nipe Story, I want to say thank you for also giving me the opportunity to become a better writer. And I hope I have become, not I hope, I actually believe I have become a much better storyteller. There's still a lot for me to learn in this field of podcasting, but I'm just really grateful that, you know, this in Kenya and on the continent, this podcasting is still on the up. And I'm glad to be part of that cohort of people who are learning and producing content for Africa. So you want to start a podcast. What's important? What are the things to consider? Yet again, I'll talk about my own journey. I think there's a lot of heart in it, and I was passionate about it. I knew I loved audio. I knew how to play with audio, and the thing is, for me, I knew how to produce long form audio. Unfortunately, here in Kenya, we don't have that many avenues for long form audio. You know, you have on our radio stations, you have 3-minute bulletins. So if you're lucky, you get something for 15 minutes. But I knew I had produced documentaries, radio documentaries before. So I knew that with what I want to do with Nipe Story, I can sit in front of my laptop and edit sound for long periods and come up with a 20 to 30 minute program. So I knew, I like that. I knew I loved reading African literature. You know, and I knew I loved recording, even if it was me and I knew I loved me or someone else, and I also enjoy being in the studio. So for me, those are the key ingredients. Do you have the passion for this? Do you have the passion for for the podcast that you want to create? Do you have the passion for the thing that you want to create? Because there are times that you will find yourself either editing or working for something for so long. And the key thing, there's no return. There's no monetary return for it. You know, Nipe Story for me is a passion project. It still excites me. You know, it still excites me because very many people ask me, how much money are you getting out of this? How much does it cost you? This is a labor of love. So that's the first thing. You know, are you vested in it? Is your heart vested in it? And then the other thing I think that is important is, what's the name of your podcast? You know, I threw mud on the wall and then came up with the name Nipe Story. So give it an identity. And then from then on, ask yourself, what is this podcast about? What is the sound? What is the texture? What is the feel of the podcast? You know, and then start looking at the elements that come, the little elements that make up the whole. You know, so for me, I knew I wanted a particular sound for Nipe Story, and that sound had to be very African. I knew I wanted jingles. You know, I wanted a music bed. So I approached a number of sound producers and asked them to come up, and I told them about what I wanted what Nipe Story was about, and more so how I wanted Nipe Story to be heard. And they came up with the current sound that you hear on the podcast. There was quite a bit of back and forth because I was pretty specific. I wanted Nipe Story to have a contemporary African feel. So I was very specific, and that was just with the jingles that you hear on the podcast, the stabs, you know, the sound that just comes in, and even the music bed. So I put in all those elements together. And then the next thing is content. What is your podcast about? Mine was storytelling. Where was I going to get those stories from? Initially, I approached the Kwani Trust. They had this book series called The Kwaninis. You know, and when I went through the Kwaninis, I'm like, wow, those are lots of pages. First of all, I can't afford to pay a voiceover or even ask my friends to sit in a studio for 2 hours and not give them anything, some form of appreciation in doing those stories. So I really, and looking back, I remember having transcribed some of those Kwaninis, and I'm like, they were somewhat between 15 to 20 pages, and I was beginning to see that this is going to be really long. And considering I was going to be using various voices for free, I'm like, is this going to work? You know, so I started rejigging what I wanted with the podcast. So I went for the shorter stories, which you do here on the podcast. I approached a few friends. I managed to get a few friends to voice. And I approached a few people initially for studio time. And I was given free studio time, and I was able to record the first 3 episodes. Initially, there were meant to be 5, but time was running out. One thing I learned along the way during the research was, if you're going to start a podcast, don't just start with 1 episode. Make sure you build a bank of episodes, such that if it's good, people might want to listen again. So the goal was to have at least 5 episodes before the launch, so that if I was rolling them out, it would be all 5. But man, like I said, that work is hard. So I just rolled out 3. You know, and then from then I knew I was on it. I was on the right track. 3 podcasts, such that people were able to go and listen to the next one, and listen to the next one. And I knew I had to come up with a 4th, because the feedback I was getting was really good and positive. And I liked what I was listening to. You see that, yet again, passion. I liked what I was listening to. I liked the fact that this thing was coming together. The other thing that is important is sound. Sound is key. Invest in good equipment if you can. I have a simple microphone. I bought a microphone that I've had for a while. I made sure I had good headphones, and I use a mini disc recorder. And these 3 I use when recording the intro or the outro of the podcast, or the links as they are called. And I want to thank Kaz Lucas, because she told me the key thing you need to invest in is good sound. And having worked in the media and in radio for a while, I would really my credibility would be at risk if I had a podcast that did not have good sound. So you sort of have to think about, is what I'm producing pleasant not just to my ear, but the ear of the listener? So think about that. And then the other thing is, ask yourself, what is the structure of the podcast? What does the beginning sound like? What does the end sound like? What does the middle, the main structure sound like? And the end. I must confess, I am a bit of a purist or a traditionalist, and I think it's because of my background in the newsroom and having worked in that space and listening to a lot of audio from the BBC. For me, structure is important. There are podcasts out there that they do have structure, but as not as rigid as what I'm used to. So even if it's banter between friends, that banter, I think, needs to be thought of, sometimes needs to be scripted, have key points, and know the direction that you're going with, even if it's banter or conversation with your pals talking about music or reviewing a video game, or if it's talking about food. Don't let anyone lie to you. All these things have structure. All of them know exactly how they start, and all of them know exactly how they're going to finish. And those that don't have that structure, or at least don't have a roadmap, you will be able to tell immediately. So now that you have all these bits and pieces in place for your podcast, and you've produced your podcast and you're happy with the way it sounds, where do you host it? I chose to host my podcast on SoundCloud. I did my research. Check out the internet. There's a lot of information out there, and that's where I did my groundwork. I'd heard about SoundCloud and I went to check it out, and it was free initially, and I thought, not everyone will have access to a smartphone. I wanted to make sure that if someone was in a cyber cafe, they should be able to go onto the SoundCloud website and listen to Nipe Story there. So which is why I figured, let me put it there. Then I learned, once you get the RSS feed, which is the link that you share with other platforms, because that's what they asked for. And everything for me pointed me towards SoundCloud. So I did that, registered my name onto SoundCloud, and then registered my name, and I found out I was already on it. And then I just tied Nipe Story to that. So when you go onto SoundCloud, you don't actually find Nipe Story. You find Kevin Mochiro, And I figured, I'm already here. Let's just run with it, Would I change it? Maybe yes. But we're here now, over 60 episodes now. Nipe Story has found its name, and yet again, this is a podcast that I'm so proud to tie my name into, to tie my name to Kizungu. So after that, you get the RSS feed, and then where do you want your podcast to be? I wanted my podcast to be on Apple. There was Stitcher, and there was another African platform that was really promoting African podcasts by then, and I wanted it to be on those three. So I registered on that, and at least I had an RSS feed, and I was able to share that with them. But yet again, for me, SoundCloud was important for the reason that I stated earlier. Other people who do not have access to smartphones would be able to still access the website and still listen to Nipe Story, hence giving Nipe Story reach. So ask yourself, is this accessible to a wide audience? Because you're looking at growing your audience. Will they be able to listen to? And for me, I think I'm very cognizant of the fact that I live in Africa. This is my home. This is my heart. Not everyone will have access to our smartphones. We still have people accessing cyber cafes, and if someone can go into a cyber cafe, plug in headphones, they should be able to listen to Nipe Story, and I thought that for me works. I just want to make sure that this is a podcast that is accessible in as easy way as possible, hopefully to as many people as possible.
And go.
So a quick disclaimer as we're talking about sound, you might hear a dog. There it goes again. There she goes. That's Angelica, my neighbor's dog. She is rather loud, and we just want to make sure that you will to let you know that you will hear her as we're talking about the kit. So please excuse Angelica. It's barking, and please bear with us. Yet again, sound is important, and I think sometimes we just have to be honest about the circumstances that we record or work under. So please bear with us, and welcome Angelica into this session. So the passion's there, the content's there, the structure is there. So now we're going to look at the tools that are needed in making the podcast work and the things that have worked for me. When I didn't have access to a studio, I still had to produce a podcast, or even when I have had the audio sent to me, I still had to do the intro and the outro. I still had to do my links. How is that possible? Like I said, you have to invest in good sound. Put some money aside if you're going to start the podcast and invest. The most important thing is invest in a good mic. This is what I use. It's a tiny little mic, but it works. And all the sound that you've heard on Nipe Story has been done on this. If it's coming from me, I'd say like 99% of it. And the other thing was, it has a pop shield. I live in a very windy area, and sometimes because I'll tell you why the pop shield is important, because the mouth is very close to me, and I pop, my P's and my B's are very apparent. So this is very important. Get yourself a pop shield, get yourself a good mic. Also, the other thing that has been helpful is a mic stand. This is it, and it helps. It helps in recording if you're recording from the table, or sometimes if you're holding it. There are times I've had to hold this. And when does this come in handy? Especially if I'm recording under the blanket. Under the blanket or under the duvet, because I don't want the sound doesn't interfere. The other thing when it comes to recording, another thing that is important is your mobile phone. These have very good audio. So if you have a phone, make sure the recording facility is really great. And a tip that I learned from people who actually who actually record their podcast over the phone is a blanket. Make sure the sound where the place that you're recording is well insulated, that the sound is not dead. So if you're recording at home, on a desk, make sure that your phone is on some form of piece of cloth. In this case, I have this blanket, and that helps me. I found good headphones are pretty good for me, especially when it comes to editing, and also when I'm recording my links. I always record with my headphones on, especially these, and they pick up really good sound. They are a pretty good brand. I was fortunate enough that I had put some money aside to record this. I also use a mini disc recorder. It's a Marantz mini disc recorder. This is an old machine, but it has worked faithfully for me. You can see it's weather beaten, but hey, this is the sound of Nipe Story. I use this, I record onto this, and then I transfer that onto my laptop. You may want to know why I don't have a mic that is just directly connected to the laptop. And the reason is sometimes if I'm recording by myself, I'm recording under my bed. I'm recording under my bed. I have a script that I have to read. I have the phone, so I find it easier just recording. This is very portable. So for me, it is so much easier recording with this. And at times, even if I have recorded a few of my links on my phone, so it's easier for me to be under a blanket. I sit on my sofa and then cover myself with this, and I make sure that I have another set of earphones so that I'm able to hear myself. And the other thing I do is sometimes I use this for my scripts. So it's easier for me to read my script with this, and I have my headphones on, and the mini disc recorder is already at work. So for me, I find it a lot more practical using this. You might wonder why there's a solar light here as well. Well, if I'm under the blanket, sometimes I need to read my scripts if it's not over the phone. And there's stories that have had at least maybe 6-7 pages of scripts, 6-7 pages rather of text, and it is easier for me to illuminate this, to switch this on. There, that's how it works. To switch this on and have this here, and I've got my script, and I'm able to record. So this has really been a lifesaver for me. So basically, if I've not forgotten anything else, if I do, get in touch with me. You can find me on Twitter. If you have any more questions, my handle is @KevMwachiro. If you want to know about the more technical bits of recording and how I've overcome this, but basically this is what it is. Recap: make sure you have a good phone. If you don't have a good mic, have a good mic. I think a pop shield is a key investment. A stand as well, for you to hold and also to place on the table. I prefer to use a mini disc recorder. I know some people who would rather record straight into the microphone. I have my headphones here, and this, my torchlight, in case I need to, in case I'm under the blanket, under my bed, for more illumination. Like I said, and I've told people this a number of times, podcasting has really taught me to be creative with what I have, and because I don't have access to my studio, this basically is my studio. Well, that's it for me. I hope you overlap. Well, that's it for me. I hope you found this session beneficial. And you know what? Take the plunge. I took the plunge 3 years ago into the world of podcasting, and just know you're not alone. There's so much information. There's so many podcasts out there, on the internet. And there's something that I want to say that I forgot to mention earlier on. Listen to as many podcasts as you can. Enjoy listening to podcasts, but more so also enjoy learning. Thank you for being with me, and thank you for taking the time to listen to me. Check out Nipe Story on SoundCloud. Follow us also on our socials. We're on Twitter, and we're also on Facebook. And get in touch if you have a story to submit for Nipe Story. Thank you for listening to me, and looking forward to having you listen to more of Nipe Story.